Hey guys, today is going to be a topic touched upon that many of you who have been part of the NRS community may have seen, read, or heard about. Mortal Kombat 9. This game gets mentioned a lot by some of its players in its community, even almost a decade later from its release. You may come across some chatter of this game if you're in a stream chat at a tournament, browsing through social media, or conversing on a message board about NRS games. But why? Is it just rose-tinted glasses? Or did this game capture something that many games don't quite get right? Let's get right into it. The time is March 2011. And a new Mortal Kombat game is releasing in April with the title Mortal Kombat, which is essentially a reboot of the franchise. With this game being the 9th main installment, the community refers to the game as Mortal Kombat 9, and we were all a month away from its release. But how was the Mortal Kombat community at this stage? What was the scene like? How did players interact? And most importantly, how did the games play before Mortal Kombat 9's debut? Let's go through these questions one at a time, and for that, we're going to have to take a memory lane trip way back in time to where the new generation MK community first started in 2004. " 2004 was the year that a brand new Mortal Kombat game was going to officially have online for the first time ever. It was a monumental time for Mortal Kombat games as things were just about to begin, and the emergence of a reconstructed and modernized community was about to take over. mk5.org was the main Mortal Kombat site that some of you old schoolers may have heard of from back then. Anyone who was thirsty for online Mortal Kombat news found out about this site during Deadly Alliance. This site then became changed to Mortal Kombat Online, which kind of accommodated the community's direction with Mortal Kombat Deception. The scene was primarily online based. Just about everyone who could played online. While there were some tournaments held offline prior to Deception's release through Early Life Deadly Alliance and 2D Mortal Kombat games hosted in certain regional areas, all of the 3D era games between Mortal Kombat Deception, Armageddon, and Mortal Kombat vs DC Universe were all predominantly played online. This meant things were different. There were no offline tournaments you had to travel to win to prove you were good. You played people online, and the person who won was regarded as the better player. There were online tournaments, community exhibition face-offs, player-constructed ladder matches, monstrous clan wars, and first attempts, all to display your skill in combat. Back then, if you weren't part of a reputable online clan, you were considered a nobody or a rogue looking to try out and be accepted by a team. There were an insane amount of clans back then. So many that just about every person you would come across in an online MK room or forum would have abbreviations that was associated to their clan either in their gamertag or in their signature on the forums. Any offline gatherings or events weren't advertised on the front page, only clan wars were. EVO 2005 Mortal Kombat Deception was the only big tournament advertised, and it ended up being a flop because players just stuck to playing the game online and showed no interest to travel. Clan wars would be hyped up for weeks, similar to that of how the current generation NRS scene does with offline tournament majors today. Some of the most famous clans from back in the day that were guarded by dominance and skill or popularity were TKO, BMF, BTD, DVL, PWR, OWN, BR, TRF, RA, Killa, C88, STB, STR, LR, GRL, FTK, 1320 Crew, NBK, SK, 4 Horsemen of Apocalypse, WM, FTR, TOG, RS, DA, 666, CW, TSE, DM, MOB, SM, EG, Nemesis, 140 Clan, AU, MOC, L7, BOS, DE, AN, EMP, DK, and NOC. As you can see, clans were a huge deal back then. It was the bane of the online Mortal Kombat community, and everyone who had any shred of competence wanted to be part of an elite group, form a strong crew, and destroy and crush all other clans. Back in these days, the good game thread was a sacred thing. You always posted in the thread after a series with anybody, and if you didn't, you were called out on it. Games were always done in minimal sets of a first to 10. A first to 5 was acceptable if life was happening, but scores were always reported and posted for everyone to see who was beating who, and by how much. Looking at it now, those silly standards unintentionally helped us break down the game in matchups more than we would have. And I believe it's a subconscious rule that many of the older community players follow to this day. This leads into the next predicament. The community was split into two kinds of players. The first group were those that played to win no matter what. They used the most broken characters and the strongest strategies that were the hardest to counter. The second group of players that played by an honor code only, meaning no overuse of cheap abusable tactics, no infinites, and no repetitive selecting of characters that were considered overpowered. Because of this conflicting group of players among the community duking it out daily, a set of community rules were soon established to ensure everyone would have the best experience possible online. If you didn't follow these rules, you were blacklisted, called out on the forums, and you had your reputation at arms. The 5 golden rules that became the standard of the online 3D MK era for many years to come were: 1. No infinites of any kind. You only got 1 rep of the infinite to extend the combo. Second rule was glitches were allowed as long as they didn't make any character invincible or unreachable. Third rule was death traps were to be turned off and disabled. Fourth rule was no created character or bosses. And finally, the 5th rule was all monthly tournament ladder matches, clan wars, or high-staked first to 10s had to have one of the players that were engaging in battle provide evidence through a screenshot or a video, or it didn't count. There were countless good and challenging players that knew how to play the game, abuse what was cheap, and shape up the meta for what it was becoming. People were thirsty for blood, and when you combine a competitive drive with just about everyone having full online anonymity, things become contentious. Players just wanted to kick your ass in the most humiliating way and then talk shit the entire day until you got your revenge. Scalps through the feet were collected and brought back to their clan as trophies and pride to commemorate. Props or compliments were a very rare thing to see or receive from any opposing player. Combined with the community growing increasingly frustrated at the game's balance and how the game was poorly shaping up to play competitively, things were heading south. By now, I'm sure you're wondering, how did the 3D Mortal Kombat games play? The 3D Mortal Kombat games all strived on offense, 50-50s, mix-ups, and continuous Oki after Oki after Oki. There were a couple very strong zoning characters, but the game was primarily 50-50 and rushdown based across the board. You got hit once, you were immediately put into the blender while watching your health drain until you could guess right to escape. There were a ton of unreactable overheads and lows, throws that were untechable and led to full combos, many unblockable launchers, 50-50 string mix-up, and a pitiful wake-up game where your best option most of the time was just praying you correctly block your opponent's next attack as you get up from the ground. Many of the players despised the gameplay after some time, calling it nothing but a guess fest with broken characters. A lot of people that grew up playing Mortal Kombat series were as confused as to why blocking seemed to only work half of the time, ironically. 50-50s were a foreign concept to many Mortal Kombat players, and to many other fighting game players that branched into Deception to give it a try, they also were greeted with a taste of disgust as the game took the meaning of 50-50s to a whole new level of absurdity. And to these players' demise, the next 7 years of 3D Mortal Kombat were all going to heavily be based on the 50-50 meta. Regardless of how bad the game was being received, there was still a plentiful group of players that were just better than everyone else. Players that loved the game and somehow seemingly tended to outguess, for lack of a better term, other players when it came to playing the game, consistently winning and staying on top. You know what they say, one man's trash is another man's treasure. During this time, Mortal Kombat Online was in a constant war zone with Deception's players and its moderators. Moderators were getting fed up of all the daily drama and shit shows stemming from only one part of the entire website, which was the PS2 and Xbox Deception online forums. They had enough and they were going to do everything they could to stop it. But this came at a price. Competitive players one by one started to get banned, have their threads closed, their threads deleted, and ultimately were alienated for their competitive nature and the need to sustain their egos. Pink Ranger was the moderator that accumulated the most fatalities and banning of its members, shortly followed by Purple Bunny, Mega Babe, and many other moderators. One by one, members started to leave the forum. Things had to be done, and there was one person that stepped up to the plate. His name was JTF, and he created a brand new site dubbed as the first ever 3D competitive Mortal Kombat website. That site was called Mortal Kombat Armageddon Central, which then later on became Mortal Kombat Central. But like moths to the flame, the online community could not be contained. Outlash broke out over an incident, and Mortal Kombat Central went down with it. Some players fled back to Mortal Kombat Online, but it just wasn't the same. Then that's when a player named Gerchap created Mortal Kombat United, which is where the rest of Mortal Kombat Armageddon's competitive life and future game Mortal Kombat vs. DC Universe would be given a home. But history was repeating itself. A new game was on the horizon, and it was Mortal Kombat 9. There was inner conflict with the website Mortal Kombat United, and players started to advocate that they didn't just want to be known as an online community anymore. They wanted to have an offline scene like how other fighting games had. They were tired of clan battles and online drama and fights being pushed onto the front page over players who were trying to build offline locals in preparation for MK9. This is when the seal was broken that day. Storms and Crazybone resigned as admins for Mortal Kombat United, and then emerged yet another brand new site named the Mortal Kombat Empires. This was the site so many players had been waiting for. Mortal Kombat Empires promised to promote and focus on offline tournaments and regional scenes over online. It finally happened, and the curse was broken. Over 7 years of a community strictly embedded to online and netplay culture, being abandoned and challenged to change their ways and become something different that meant more. With this momentum and determination leading into MK9, Mortal Kombat Empires had changed their name to Test Your Might to represent how strong the community can be. Test Your Might to this day is still the hub of all competitive Mortal Kombat since 2011, and it's still going strong. Mortal Kombat 9 was finally here. The time had come, and this is what everyone was waiting for.
You will learn respect.
Your soul is mine.
This game was promised to us to be a game with competitive play in mind, and when we all got our hands on it, it was unbelievably different. The game played nothing like the past 7 years of 3D MK games that so many of us were used to. 50-50s were dramatically toned down. Barely any characters had real 50-50s, to the point where many of us were lost in confusion as to how to play and open somebody up without constant overheads and lows. Even many attacks hit advantage and pokes were severely toned down. Pokes weren't plus 20 on hit anymore like we were used to. Everything seemed to have been made to create less guaranteed situations. An actual wake-up system was introduced that granted characters the ability to perform defensive wake-ups with invincibility frames. This was all foreign to us, but the community adapted. We all slowly started developing the meta and seeing what worked and what generated wins. Movement was key. This game had the hardest learning curve to movement compared to any other Mortal Kombat game. You had to have mastered the movement system to even stand a chance sometimes. Not being able to execute the movement as good as your opponent and master block dashing was a huge disadvantage. The potential movement made it so players could run circles around those that didn't take the time to learn how to maneuver efficiently. Weaving back and forth to keep your opponent guessing on your placement, quickly positioning yourself to optimal anti-air ranges, and rapid machine gun dashing towards your opponent to try and bait reactions were all key in shaping up the meta. Powerful anti-airs were prevalent in high-level play. It didn't matter if you were playing a top tier or bottom tier, anti-airs were a language that every character could understand. The way characters effectively anti-aired was also unique among the cast. Characters like Cabal and Striker anti-aired with their roundhouses. Characters like Kano, Kung Lao, Noob Saba, and Baraka anti-aired with their special moves. Characters like Smoke, Cage, Sonya, Sector, Luke King anti-aired with their standing jabs. And characters like Quan Chi and Scorpion anti-aired with their down one pokes. There were characters like Shiva, Cyrix, Jax that had anti-air specific grabs and attacks that had full invincibility that were amazing anti-airs. And down two uppercuts were also some characters' strongest anti-airs, like for Cyber Sub-Zero and Freddy Krueger. Now MK9 wasn't a perfect game. It had more than its fair amount of flaws, just like any other game did. The poor balance, the armor system, and many of the bugs that plagued the game, these were all things that the community did not like. NRS was only able to release 2 official patches to help the game, but unfortunately 2 patches aren't enough to fix any game. Regardless, the community loved the game and the support was through the roof. MK9 as a game was so different to the Mortal Kombat titles that the online era was playing for the past decade. With such brand new gameplay on our hands, and now the push for offline becoming the main source to prove yourself as a competitor, the entire scene and culture for the Mortal Kombat community that was purely built through online was starting to dissipate. There were so many online players that were there during the 3D era active on the boards that seemingly disappeared one by one and weren't heard from again as MK9 was rising. Clans were slowly becoming less of a thing, less important. The scene was becoming less like Jerry Springer and more like a community of players. Mortal Kombat 9 was being added to well-known offline tournament majors. MLG was picking it up, and to our amazement, it was announced that EVO held Mortal Kombat 9 for 3 whole entire years. In a way, this was a great thing to some and a bad thing to others. A part of me does miss how incredibly fun the online era days were for the 3D Mortal Kombat games. I was a part of many clans and made some incredibly fun online friends that unfortunately I never got the chance to meet offline. But the Mortal Kombat scene being completely reborn to what it is now was totally worth it, and I would never trade that for anything. I hope you guys enjoyed my story of how I became part of a community that is incredibly amazing and how Mortal Kombat 9 changed the Mortal Kombat era for many of us.